I'm going to kick it off by going right to the phone because I've got a guest in the studio with me today by phone that's a dear friend of mine and absolutely insanely popular in Canada, particularly out of the Toronto area, but all over Canada, and becoming insanely popular around the world because from time to time he is guest host on Coast to Coast AM. And that good friend of mine is Richard Syrett. He is out of Toronto, as I said. He is the host of The Conspiracy Show, and we've got him right here on Freedom Friday today. Richard, are you with us?
I am, Carl. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Well, listen, you're living up to it and going way beyond what I just said, and thank you for your humility. But God bless you, man, and thanks for being on the show today. Listen, first, I want to delve into, the title of your show, The Conspiracy Show. So we're going to talk about the word conspiracy for a little bit and conspiracy theory, and you've got some really good understanding and history on that word, that phrase, conspiracy theory. But first, tell people how they can find you, how they can listen to you, how they can read your stuff and keep up with you, and when and where they might be able to tune into you when you're on Coast to Coast AM.
All right. Well, I got a bit of a lengthy laundry list here, so I'll try and kind of keep it short. But for the radio version of The Conspiracy Show, it's heard out of Toronto on AM 740 Zoomer Radio.
Okay.
And it's a 50,000-watt clear channel, which means that at night we can power our signal up, and it penetrates very deep into the United States. It's heard in about 28 states on AM 740.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, I have a growing list of affiliates in the U.S. I think we're up at around 27, 28 markets.
Wow.
And if you can't catch it on one of the affiliates or listen on AM 740, you can stream it live anywhere in the world on zoomerradio.ca. And then, of course, the podcast is just everywhere. Just Google podcast, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett.
Right. Okay.
So that's the radio. And then the television show, The Conspiracy Show, now in Season 3, is seen across Canada on Vision TV. And we're now in the early stages of syndication in the U.S. I think we're on in about 40 markets. So check your local listings, as they say.
Right. And I'm going to, how do I say this? Well, what you had me on your television show. Was it your first season?
We did an episode on the Bible codes, and I'm trying to think now, Carl. I think that was season 1.
Well, the point I'm trying to make, the fact that I didn't ruin your show is just such a blessing to me. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. No, I'm so glad.
Carl.
Well, I'm so glad.
Elevated the discussion.
Oh yes. Well, you're so kind. By the way, you're instantly invited back on my show now because. But no, because I'm so glad that I know that you were kicking it off back then, and you were. I don't know how long you had run or whatever, but I'm so glad to hear that you're still on with the TV and going. Now you're in your 3rd year. That's awesome, Richard.
Thank you, Carl. Yes, and it was great coming down to Florida and meeting you in the flesh, which is the great thing about the TV show, because there are people I've known for 20 years, but only as this discarnate voice, over the telephone.
Right.
So now with the TV, I get out on the road and I get to actually, meet people, which is nice.
Yeah. No, that was really cool to get to meet you and to do that show, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing that show on the Bible codes. That was a blast. Well, listen, let's first of all. What do you think? Why do you think people are so fascinated by conspiracies? I mean, what makes your show so popular? I mean, it's insanely popular. What's the deal with it?
Well, I sort of had this internal dialogue with myself when it was time to name the show, and should I shy away from conspiracy? Should I name it? I decided to go right into people's grill with the name conspiracy because. I always say I want to take the word back.
Right.
Because conspiracy theory is now used in the pejorative. It's used by people in the mainstream media often to stifle dissenting voices.
Yes.
To stifle a healthy debate, and that's really unfortunate.
Yes, I know when I started years ago just examining Obama's identity. I mean, this is before I had reached any conclusion that the guy was a fraud. Immediately, by media sources, I was labeled, he's a conspiracy theorist.
Precisely. And if people only realized the genesis of the term conspiracy theorist, which is, again, used to stifle debate, it was actually a term that was devised by the CIA. In fact, there's a document. It's called CIA Document 1035-960, and it was subtitled Concerning Criticism of the Warren Report. And this was back in 1967. And the CIA, again, were concerned about people that were questioning the Warren Report. And God knows there were many. They were coming out of the woodwork, and with good reason. The Warren Report, it's a wonderful piece of fiction.
Right.
So it can be, it certainly can be enjoyed on that level. But the CIA wanted to, again, stifle that debate. And so they concocted this term called conspiracy theorist, again, to be used in the pejorative.
Uh-huh.
So if someone was questioning the Warren Report, people in the mainstream media were instructed by the CIA, or academics or whomever were instructed to throw around that word conspiracy theorist. Oh, you're nothing but a conspiracy theorist.
Uh-huh.
Or, that's that theory, that conspiracy theory is being funneled, through the communists and so forth.
Right.
Again, devised to stifle dissent.
Right.
And again, so the term conspiracy theory, Carl, is actually a conspiracy.
Right. Well, Richard, you're exactly right. As you know, I spent 10 years in Florida law enforcement prior to being in the ministry and prior to being on talk radio. And so, I've done criminal investigations, and I have worked very closely with criminal investigation units, and I was a patrol officer and deputy sheriff in several different sheriff's offices, been in and out of the state prison system as an officer and in and out of law enforcement. So, I've been around criminal investigation, and I happen to know, Richard, and by the way, I have a bachelor's degree in criminology from Florida State University, so I studied it academically as well as actually did it and lived it. And I happen to know, as you're trying to take the word back, conspiracy and conspiracy theory, I happen to know that almost all crimes, not all crimes, but almost all crimes begin with a conspiracy. And a good law enforcement officer will develop a theory about that conspiracy as he investigates it. And a good law enforcement officer truly is a good conspiracy theorist, and he works at arriving to the best evidence that he has, forensic examination, et cetera, until it's courtroom ready. And if in the process of theorizing and investigating he discovers that there was no crime, then the case is done and over with. Right? Am I right, Richard?
You're 100% right. There's a professor at the University of Boise State University. Her name is Gina Husting, and she wrote a peer-reviewed article that was called "Dangerous Machinery: Conspiracy Theorist as a Transpersonal Strategy of Exclusion." And in it, she wrote, "If I call you a conspiracy theorist, it matters little whether you have actually claimed that a conspiracy exists or whether you have simply raised an issue that I would rather avoid.
Right.
By labeling you, I strategically exclude you from the sphere where public speech, debate, and conflict occur." And that's how the term is being used today, and most unfortunately by the Fifth Estate or the Fourth Estate, the journalists, who are charged with a very important responsibility, which is to safeguard our personal freedoms and to question authority.
Right.
And they have totally abdicated that responsibility. They have abandoned the playing field.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Let me ask you this. So in the news, there have been some recent revelations that I want you to speak to, giving more credence to conspiracy theory itself. What are some of those revelations?
Well, in the end of 2013, the Washington Times published a year in review, as many newspapers do, and I'll never forget this headline because it was vindication for many of us that investigate conspiracies or state secrets, if people are more comfortable with that term.
Right.
And of course, the Edward Snowden revelations had just come to light. And the Washington Times headline was 2013, the year that proved your paranoid friends were right.
Right.
So I would start, of course, with Edward Snowden's whistleblowing, and we can have debates as to whether he's a hero or whether he's a traitor and so forth. But the documents that were released certainly proved many of our paranoid friends, and I would include myself among them, were correct. That we are living in an Orwellian society. We are being spied upon, I mean, that's just
Right.
one layer.
Right.
I mean, we can go back to 1975 and the Church Committee, Senator Frank Church, and uncovered, a long list of political assassinations by
Right.
the CIA.
Right.
And that's, whether you want to talk about the assassination of Allende in Chile, or the ousting, a coup d'état that was organized by the CIA to oust a duly elected president of Iran in order to install the Shah, so that the Western powers could get their hands on Iranian oil. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
We had recently the CIA admitted that they were conducting these. They were gonorrhea experiments, deliberately exposing or denying people with gonorrhea treatment in Guatemala, exposing people to gonorrhea. We go back to 1932 and the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, where African Americans were those with syphilis and those without were denied treatment. They weren't told about this, and this didn't come to light until 40 years later,
Right.
until 1972.
Yeah.
And so anyone who was talking about the Tuskegee syphilis experiments were labeled a conspiracy theorist, but we know now it's true.
It was true. Yeah, it was true all along. We're being gaslighted, aren't we, Richard?
No question.
Yeah, no question. The gaslighting technique. No, you're crazy. No, you're crazy. You don't really see that. That's not really happening. And then finally, when the evidence comes out, they say, okay, well, it was happening, but it was for your own good. Gaslighting.
That's right.
It goes on all the time. The government they're pros at that.
Well, you mentioned, yes, it was for your own good. There was a term coined by Leo Strauss, who was sort of the philosophical, or the grandfather of the philosophical movement, neoconservatism, and which has nothing to do with conservatism or Republicans, for those that want to make that connection.
Yeah, right.
In fact, as Pat Buchanan has pointed out, the neocons probably have more in common with the Bolsheviks. So wrap your head around that one. But anyway, Leo Strauss coined the term the noble lie. And what he meant was that it's all right for our governments to actually perpetrate conspiracies,
right.
and to lie to the public in order to preserve the state,
right.
to preserve its most vaunted institutions. And part of that was the intent was to stifle too rigorous an investigation into the state, because again, it would even if the accusations are true, it would undermine the state's value system, undermine its institutions.
Because Richard Syrett is my guest right now. He is the host of the insanely popular The Conspiracy Show, which hails out of Toronto, Canada, radio program and television show, and is picked up by 28 different states, I think he said, already in the United States. He's also a guest host on Coast to Coast AM. Richard, welcome to Freedom Friday. I want to continue this conversation about conspiracy theory, etc. But first, it's my understanding you've got a big event coming up in the Toronto area, and since we have Toronto listeners, why don't you tell the folks there in Toronto what's going on?
Sunday, November 16th, I'm hosting an all-day conference-style event. It's called Follow the Truth, the Conspiracy Show Summit. I'm bringing 6 amazing, compelling speakers to the Regent Theatre in Oshawa, which is just about 40 minutes east of Toronto. And if people want to buy passes for the event, they can log on to followthetruth.tv.
Right.
Followthetruth.tv. Get more information there. There's a list of the speakers. I don't always just talk conspiracy. I also talk about the paranormal, UFO, ET issues. So we've got some of the preeminent UFO researchers. Professor Ronald Mallett from the University of Connecticut, who's a theoretical physicist. We'll be talking about time travel. Again, followthetruth.tv, and they can also order tickets at the box office at the Regent Theatre, 905-721-3399. 905-721-3399. And again, it's Follow the Truth, the Conspiracy Show Summit, Sunday, November the 16th.
Okay, fantastic. I'm so glad you're able to get that out. 905-721-3399, correct?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Richard, okay, so let's just talk about conspiracy theories and recent revelations in the news that give more credence to the correct use of conspiracy theories, and helps people to realize that, a lot of times we're vindicated. I mean, we're called idiots, we're called nuts for years, and then boom, there's a vindication. I can tell you, and I don't want to get off into this, but I can tell you, when the Zulu Arpaio conferences come up in a few months, millions of people in America who've been trashed and called birthers and conspiracy theorists, you folks will be vindicated, all right? There's an example. But, in the past, Watergate, Richard, that was a conspiracy. But look, good journalists, they theorized, they came up with a theory, they were conspiracy theorists, but they uncovered the whole thing and brought down the U.S. president. I mean, that was a conspiracy theory. The American Revolution, Richard, it was a conspiracy. And people...
Carl, are you still there? I apologize. I lost you there.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. You
didn't being jammed.
Yeah, probably NSA. But I'm just talking about conspiracy theories. I mean, my audience heard me. But things that have been happening. I said Watergate. That was a conspiracy theory. The American Revolution was a conspiracy. And
Absolutely.
And people theorized, about it. And people say, "Oh, you're nuts. That's not going to happen. There's nobody going to throw tea in the harbor in Boston." But it happened. Listen, several years ago, based upon information that I had from contacts I had in Washington and in the news and investigative journalists, I was telling the listeners that the IRS was targeting various groups. Well, I was called an idiot. I was called a conspiracy theorist. But guess what? Now we know they were doing it. Years ago, I told people that the government, the NSA, were tracking and recording and keeping phone calls. Now, I was called nuts. I was called an idiot. I was called a conspiracy theorist. But do you know how I knew that, Richard? Because I've got friends in law enforcement that have been my friends for 20, 30 years, and they were telling me that they were going to federal classes, FBI classes, where the FBI was telling them, and these guys were with the Florida Highway Patrol, sheriff's offices, sheriffs, friends of mine, the FBI was telling them years ago, even before cell phone technology, that they were recording every phone conversation and keeping them in a database. And I was telling that over the air for years, and people laughed at me. Now what do we know? What has just been proven, that the NSA has been and is recording every phone call.
Yes, it's unfortunate for those of us, I guess, that it's a hard road to hoe.
Yes.
To have that kind of knowledge and to try to convince people and to have to suffer the the ridicule and so forth. But that's a small price to pay. To get the truth out. But the point is that these things sometimes they take decades.
Yeah.
We mentioned the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. That took 40 years for that to come out. The Kennedy assassination, who knows? It may take another 30 or 40 years. But the truth will prevail.
Yes.
It will rise to the top as oil does, rises above water.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, we've got about 40 seconds. Just quickly, what's one of the most intriguing or craziest conspiracies ever on your show?
Well, I'm still fascinated by the missing Malaysian airline flight 370.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard it's